Hello, and welcome to Workplace Stories, the podcast where human capital experts share their real-world experiences and insights. Hosted by Red Thread Research, Workplace Stories surfaces the latest industry trends, innovative talent strategies, and best practices for success. Tune in for practical advice on how to best transform your workplace.
Welcome to Workplace Stories. Today we had the opportunity to talk to Zane Zumbahlen, who is the Chief People Officer for Wedgwood Veterinary Pharmacy. He's only been in that role for a little over 2 months, I think, but he was able to share with us some of the things that he's learned throughout his career about being a vulnerable leader and how that can lead to positive organizational change. Stisha, what stood out to you in this conversation?
There were a number of things that really grabbed me. He talked a lot about how he goes into every conversation really actively listening. And I felt like we could see that in the podcast, and we could see how he really had this quiet confidence when it came to listening and then having something to say. A point I made in the podcast is it felt like he was low ego, high confidence. And I think he may not have thought that was a compliment, but it was. And what I felt like he had confidence around was in his ability to listen, to take in information, synthesize it, and then to share something that was meaningful to the other person as a result of that. And the other part of that confidence equation, if you will, is he also talked about how he has a belief that he can always make things better on their way from A to B, to be the change agent. And just that quiet confidence around change and listening, I think really stood out to me. So that was thing one. The other thing that really jumped out was there was an example he gave of helping with a program that supports women's development and women in the pipeline in Japan. And he explained how he had that discussion with folks and really listened to what they said. And they talked about how some of their concerns were around risk and taking new roles, et cetera. And then as a result of that, actually designed a program and approach that flipped the risk equation for those women, where if they didn't take these new roles, like they wouldn't get this 10% increase in compensation. So there was a positive risk, like a positive outcome potentially. But then if it didn't work, they could go back to their old roles. And like that was a brilliant, programmatic, systematic change. I was like, I love that. I love it. So how about you, Danny?
I loved that story too, for the reasons that you mentioned, but also because it shows that at least where he was in his larger organization, he had the power to make some of those changes. You know what I mean? So a lot of times HR is directed to do things. In this case, he actively listened. He experimented with something that they've never tried before. He had the ability and the power to actually make that change, which we always talk about systems. He was talking systemically as well, but the system has to not just be at the level where you're trying to make the change. It has to be above to make sure that you have the ability to make the change and to make those decisions. So I thought that was really good. It was always also super interesting to talk to him because it felt like we were getting sort of an inside view of some of these stories that he talked about. He was a very active listener when he talked to us. He was really vulnerable with us and told us some stories. It helped me understand how this idea of relationships and vulnerability really can lead to these larger changes and change initiatives within organizations. He told 3 just really good, distinct stories about how he was vulnerable or how he was increasing the vulnerability within groups and how that just helped people relate better and they were able to work together and move on, which I thought was great. He is also the only person that we've ever interviewed who has actively asked for direct feedback at the end. It was fascinating. As soon as we stopped recording, he said, all right, I've been working on these things. How did I do on these things and how can I do better? Which was really interesting. So it feels like he practices what he preaches. It was a really interesting thing to see, a microcosm of him as a person, as a leader.
Yeah, agreed. One other thing I just want to throw in there is, y'all know we love lightning round questions, but sometimes they're a little bit, we get into something, but we don't go necessarily that deep. His lightning round questions were great.
I know.
And his third one, I'll just kind of tease it a little bit. We asked him about who had most influenced his work ethic. And that story, it was awesome.
I know.
So good. So I'm not going to spoil it for y'all, want y'all to listen, but just want to flag that was particularly powerful today.
Yeah. At any rate, we loved our conversation with Zane, and we think you're going to like it as well. So please give it a listen. If you like it, please follow Workplace Stories on the podcast platform of your choice. And if you really like it or would like to learn more about some of the research that we conduct that introduces some of these ideas that Zane talked about, follow us at www.redthreadresearch.com and invest in the research. It's the only way it gets done. Thanks so much. Welcome, Zane. We're happy to have you.
Hello.
As we get started, tell us a little bit about your work and your role.
So I am the Chief People Officer for Wedgwood Vet Pharmaceuticals, the Wedgwood Vet Pharmacy. We do formulas and compounding for medication to help make sure that your pets are taken care of. And we predominantly work through vets, but the market's changing to be more pet parents also. So it's a really cool, passionate, purpose-driven organization. So I've been there since May, and I know I need to update my LinkedIn. I've just been so busy with the transformation we're in the middle of.
Awesome. Today, we're going to share some stories, I think, from other parts of your career as well. Can you tell us kind of where you've been and what your career looks like to this point?
Almost 30 years in the business, 25 in IBM, lived across the country, and also a little over a year in Sweden, 3 years in Tokyo, Japan, which was amazing. Left there, went to CTCA, so Cancer Treatment Centers of America, was there for 3 years. One of those was after we were acquired by City of Hope. So helped in the transition and transformation to the new company. Spent a little bit of time in an interim role with NextCare in urgent care treatment centers. And then just under a year at Fidelity National Information Services before joining here.
Okay. That sounds varied and interesting.
Yeah, it's been a mixed bag of tricks.
And it sounds like you've had a lot of changes through that and have helped facilitate a number of changes. You mentioned an acquisition and a number of other things. Can you tell us a little bit about those changes? And I know one of the things we're going to talk about a lot is trust. So can you tell us about those changes and why folks should be listening to you on this topic of trust?
And this is, just to be clear, your chance to brag. So
I thought we were talking about something different. I don't build trust.
As he destroys it right there.
Rewind. So tell about some of the changes. So, it's funny in IBM, I had so much fun, and it's such a good learning and training ground. In microelectronics, you've got a cranky, cantankerous management team. Your remit is to bring them back on board and help shape and shift them. In Japan, it was a sales transformation to reinvigorate our go-to-market approach and to rebuild internal and external engagements. At CTCA, it was a couple of years of challenges, and we need to rebuild employee engagement management capability and really try to future orient the company. Now at Wedgwood, it's a mixed bag of, we've got such strong brand recognition, but it's increasingly regulated environment with competition coming all around us, including Chewy and Amazon and others. And, we've got to make sure that we've got a business that has been successful in the past, but is equally viable for success in the future. And that's what we're working through.
So as Stacia mentioned, we're going to talk about trust and leadership. In all of those organizations, I think the common denominator is change. There's a lot of change going on in the world right now, especially in a world of where we're largely focusing on AI because that's the new shiny thing. We maybe forget about trust and leadership and how important that is to change. We want to talk a little bit about that. And you mentioned a couple of the experiences you've had in your career, and we want to tease those out particularly because I think they show the importance of trust and leadership when you are going after big changes in your org. So let's just start with like a gimme question for you probably, but why is trust so important when organizations need to change?
We are in a complicated world where there is increasingly less trust in anyone. To the extent we engage and listen and make it personal, we can build camaraderie, followership, and drive change and transformation with greater capability and speed. And that is really important. Can I twist that towards my
absolutely.
Conception at Wedgwood? So through the interview process, it's really interesting. Let's say 3 conversations with the CEO. Each one was, how would you start with speed? Which is good, and he was very clear on what the important thing out of the gate was. I thought about it. And, one of the things I employ is active listening through everything I do. And there's kind of a map behind that we can talk about later. But I didn't have the time to do active listening going in. So I had to kind of try something new and different. On day 2, I stood in front of our executive team and said, I'm going to have my first team meeting and go intensely vulnerable. And I'm going to talk about my parents and having lost them when I was young. And when I get into those stories, I can't help but, it's emotional. So I cry and, I'm going to go strongly vulnerable and emotional with my HR team. Two, as a means of introduction, I sent out a one pager of my career, which talks about what I just referenced, as well as, career highs and lows and the things I'd struggled with and learned. So, one pager out to our whole executive team, I said, here's who I am throughout life on a page. And it made for some really interesting discussions. I heard about, other people having lost their mom or dad or having lived abroad, or it connected more quickly. But the interesting thing is the team meeting. So I had my HR team on the call and I scheduled 30 minutes, which clearly wasn't enough. And it was the first meeting. So it was week 2. I went through some basics of what I've learned so far and what the experience and the chance that I wanted to take to meet everybody. But I said a commitment I made was that I was going to share this story about my mom and dad. And then I did. And it weaves around to having lost my mom when I was 8 and my dad when I was 20. But there was an experience with my dad that kind of brought it all back together. And it's just a lot. It's a lot to process. It's a lot even to say here. And if we had more time, I'd tell the story. But I finished the story right at the end of the 30-minute mark. I knew I was going to go vulnerable and emotionally depth, but I didn't think through the back end of that on what I was going to say after I shared this story. It was like I'd failed to consider the end game, So I finished. I was, a little teary-eyed, and I stopped. The meeting, the time frame of the meeting was over, and I looked around, and nobody said anything for like 2 minutes. I just realized I hadn't done a full comprehensive what happens after this. It was so, live and learn, but I was experimenting. So I did. So, I put myself in a risk and vulnerable position and saw how it played out.
So why did you do that? Why did you, first of all, what prompted you? That's my worst nightmare, is sharing my deepest, darkest secrets with strangers. Stacia's known me for, 10 years, and she still doesn't know all of them. So tell me why you did it. Why did you get vulnerable that quickly with people? And
wow, what a great question. So my journey, I have come to realize that my career journey, at least the emotive or the emotional intelligent part of it, has been increasing vulnerability.
Okay.
The more I share, the more quickly I share, the greater I'm able to build something meaningful with a person or a team or a group of people. I'm sharing more, faster, and deeper. And it's interesting because rarely have I had that backfire. Almost never have I had that backfire on me. It's created an opening and space and some depth of conversation that I would have never expected. So, I shared what I just covered here at a leaders lounge in New York, like a week after I'd done it with my team. And that played well also, because people came up to me and said, this is vulnerability in action and something we need to play around with and consider. I need to create deep connection so as to try to elicit transformation and change and, impact as quickly as possible. And my experience in experimentation has been that there's no faster way than going vulnerable quickly.
Okay. Interestingly, I was listening to Adam Grant this morning, his podcast, and I just finished listening to I don't know if you all listened to it, but he did one on the reasons maybe you shouldn't have personal brand. Personal brand is very curated and shows, the things that you've done. And it's basically like a resume, right? When you build your personal brand, you're trying to curate everything. And he said kind of the same thing. If you want to build trust with people, they have to know the good and the bad, the failures and the successes, all of those types of things. And it sounds like you've actually applied that in your leadership style.
Just gave you a vulnerability and a pseudo success and a failure on the back end of the meeting where I didn't know what's good.
And now we're done. Yeah.
Well, it was funny. So after about 2 minutes, one of my team said, this is anything other than what we expected. And it was beautiful. And then some of the one-on-ones I held after that were really, really pretty impressive and enjoyable. And deeper than anything you would have normally expected in a first one-on-one with somebody. I'm not risk averse, and I certainly fail with frequency. That's part of the game also.
I know this isn't on our list of questions, but how did you get to this point? I'm sure there were other approaches you tried in the past that maybe didn't result in that faster building of trust. So what pointed you in this direction?
Experimentation. I've played around with different things. How visionary or aspirational can you go? How much can you do? So there's a saying in Japanese, nemawashi, the meeting before the meeting. Can I meet a bunch of the people and understand a little background and take that into the primary meeting itself? And nothing worked as well or as effectively. It's funny that the first time I experimented this was fast forward in IBM with a millennial group. And we were having an open discussion. I was sitting on the floor with, 25 millennials from IBM talking about what they could do for the future. And I just chose to share that within IBM, I had the lowest performance appraisal that was possible. And it was a VP at the time. So I shared it and I'm like, I don't know why I'm doing this, but it feels right here and now. And I talked about it and I talked about my disagreement with that out of the gate. And then I'd spent the whole weekend complaining, moaning, and doing a little drinking. But then on Sunday, I had to pause and reflect and realize he's right. I went in on Monday and, the feedback I'd gotten, I give my manager at the time a ton of credit. The feedback I'd gotten was that I hadn't taken the time to understand the business. I didn't build depth of relations and just, some of the dynamics around being an HR generalist. And he was right. So then I spent the next couple of months fixing that, learning the team, spending the one-on-ones, learning the business, being more converse, eloquent, and deep in that regard. But that's what I shared with the millennials. And I said, and, honestly, if not for that, I hate to say it, if not for that meeting and that occurrence, I don't know that I'd be where I am now, because it really smacked me on the head, gave me a chance to really do some introspection and course correct. But I shared it with the millennial team and they looked at me like, what? And they said, so you got this appraisal and now you're a VP. So it was a chance to say, you can take a couple of hits through a career and still recover and learn from it and become better.
I'm glad their response wasn't, you got this performance appraisal and this is the guy they sent to us.
It was just one of a string of really negative appraisals. The rest of my life has been a string of lucky sequences.
Oh my goodness. In our prep call, you shared another example of building trust when you were at IBM Microelectronics, and I think you just referenced that a few minutes ago. But can you tell folks, what is IBM Microelectronics and what did you do there?
So at the time, it was IBM Microelectronics, and they've subsequently been divested and are now a separate and thriving business and a team of really amazing people develop semiconductor development. But it was a time when IBM was going in a certain direction that was more technological than semiconductor oriented. And it'd been a tough business environment, one that, hadn't been invested in for a while. But my remit was basically 650 managers. And, it's not where it need be. Go in and re-engage them in the business in the direction, do something provocative forward. I did my active listening. So I went in and I set up 9 or 10 roundtables. The very first one of the microelectronics managers stopped and said, "You are the latest HR weenie to stand in front of us. Why should we trust you?" Wow. Okay. Here we go. Game on.
Yeah. Get it out on the table.
Literally first meeting, first minute. I was like, okay, the accurate answer is you shouldn't. I am a member of the IBM executive team. And part of my mission here is to follow through on what IBM expects of the company. I have this business unit. With that said, here's my plan. I'm going to listen here. I'm going to send you the notes that we covered. If I missed anything, or if you go to sleep tonight and say, I wish I would have, just send it to me. I'll add it in. You're going to have all those notes. I'm then going to run 9 more meetings. I'm going to take notes from those. I'm going to summarize it all. I'm going to send it to you again. So you're going to get 1 note from me on this meeting and 1 on the summary of everything. Then I'm going to build a monthly scorecard or action tracker. So the actions are going to be aligned with what you tell me the problems are, and you can hold me accountable for following through on them. Simple red, yellow, green, until I get credibility with you. And once I have credibility, then I'll switch it to quarterly. But we're going to keep moving on this. And, that was an off the cuff answer. I hadn't planned on it, but it's what I gave. So now it's become part of my playbook. The guy was like, okay, all right, fine. It's an answer. So let's see if you actually make it happen. And I did. And, it was fun. It was so much fun because what we did at the end of it. So we did the 10 roundtables, I summarized, put it out, did the monthly and quarterly tracking. But then we closed with a lead to win event for our management team. 643 managers across 3 sites, Burlington, Vermont, and Fishkill, 3 days in a row. We had the general manager speak, who's just an amazing leader and somebody for whom I take a bullet. And we had an external speaker. We covered business. But one of the most important things we did is we took the business cases that we'd effectively employed and driven and gotten investment behind. And we had poster sessions up around the meeting with the table underneath it to say, if you thought this investment in landscape was good, or this is an IT investment or process improvement or developing managers. We gave them business cases that had simplified and summarized on a single page. And they could take those with them and say, okay, I want to try to do this with the process. And they could grab the business case we built with the ROI and take it and replicate it for something they thought we needed to do. And it was cool. So before, throughout the middle of the process, we built a 40-person management advisory board. So I was running that. And, we were taking ideas in from either employees or managers and, seeing through it and pushing back if it wasn't robust enough, whatever the case might have been, or taking it forward for approval. But then after the lead to win, they bumped me off the team. So they bumped me off and said, we've got this now. You're off. You're on the executive sponsor group and you can see them when we bring the ideas forward. So we went from a disgruntled management team to a fully empowered group of managers who were bringing ideas forward, taking them through an advisory group, and the advisory group advocating up to the senior executive team for sponsorship and advocacy and implementation, which was just a really cool journey to have been on.
Yeah, for sure. Can we dig in on that just a little bit? Because it's one thing to do what you said you were going to do, which is you listened, you summarized, you put in place a way of assessing that over time, et cetera, et cetera. But I feel like there has to have been specific moments where it wasn't just like, we understand what this guy is doing, but actually this guy is helping us get to where we need to go, or something that shows them the with them in it, the what's in it for me, to get them to buy in or to be a part of the process to the point where they could kick you out of it. So were there moments such as that, or were there key things you feel like you and the team did that got over that hurdle?
It feels like every moment has a chance to either enhance or disable your credibility, right? So when I said I was going to send the notes out, and I did, there's credibility. When the notes were pretty honest and negative in some cases, more credibility. When the summary went out for all 10 roundtables, when the monthly action tracker went out and it showed that that the actions I put on the page were aligned with exactly what they said, and they were flagged as red. Inflection points, that would have been one. So the notes going out was one. The action tracker that showed that, I didn't try to sugarcoat it. I didn't color it. Well, this is light green and trending correctly. I mean, if it was red, it was red. So the authenticity behind it, doing what you say, having candid conversations, putting authentic assessment out, and then tracking to progress. And then showing the team not only that investment had been made, but here's how to make the case for such investment so that they could do it on their own. I think all of those were important points.
Yeah, I think that question sort of highlights an important point, which is there's a difference between being open and vulnerable and being credible. And it sounds like you were able to do both. And it also sounds like they have to go to bed together. So being open isn't enough. Being credible isn't necessarily enough. They kind of have to go together. I don't know how I want to ask this question. Like, how do you move the needle from one to the other? How do you make sure that you're including both? Maybe that's a better question.
How do you include vulnerability and credibility?
Yeah. Like, how do you make sure, how do you personally make sure that both of those things are happening? Because they're both necessary to build that trust.
One of the things that I do is when I go into these roundtables, listening sessions, whatever the case might be, there are generally 3 questions I ask, and it usually yields no less than 60 minutes, sometimes 90 minutes of conversation. But it's what's going well that we should continue, protect, or invest in. What's going poorly, broken, fixed, needs to be improved upon. And what would you do if you could? Now, to your question on authenticity and vulnerability, I will start with, here's what I know is already broken. So out of the gate, I'm showing vulnerability, organizational weakness in some capacity, and that not only I'm not asking you for input that I don't already know, right? So I already know something, and I want you to take it deeper. It's probably the best succinct answer that I could have to the question you just asked on how to merge the two. Now, I know we talked about Japan and the women's initiatives. That is a nice way to segue into that topic, if you'd like, or if I can.
Yeah, we do. But I think first we're going to take just a brief minute and get to know you just a little bit better. So let's ask 3 questions to sort of get to know you. And then I do want to dive that story, because that is the reason that I asked you to be on the podcast, is this Japan story that we'll dive into.
But in the meantime, we're going to do the lightning round. And the first question we have in that, Zane, is, and I have a feeling this one's going to be really good, the best prank that you've ever pulled.
It's so mean. I don't know that it's the best prank, because I do a lot of pranks. As a snippet, my assistant in Japan was Okuna-san. So I'm going to tell this one and then I'll go to the real prank. Was Okuna-san. And what I would do is, how on the handheld phones, you would have this piece.
Okay. So for those who cannot see, he's talking about the piece of the cord that connects into the actual handheld phone.
Perfect. Thank you very much. I would unplug it, or softly unplug it, so it still looked like it was in. And then I would call her from the office. And Okuna-san would answer, "Moshi moshi, moshi moshi." And then she's like, "Zane-san!" This is the best. So little things all over the place, because, man, we have to have fun with our work, and we do hard jobs that are deep and emotional and impactful and just not necessarily easy. So I try to have fun wherever I'm at and whatever I'm going. But one of the best pranks, a friend of mine, one of my best friends, I'll say he's short. He's not really that short, but he's short enough to make fun of. So He was visiting. He's like 5'10". Just really not
short.
I know, right?
How
Do you know
tall
Phil
are you?
Stages?
Yeah, I'm well below that.
I mean, that isn't the most humor when it's not really accurate. So he's not 5. Maybe he's 5'9". Anyway, he's not really that short, but he's shorter than some of us. So he was coming to visit from North Carolina up to our house in Connecticut, and he was going to stay with us for the night and hang out. So at the door, I'd left Santa hat. It was Christmas time. I'd left a Santa hat, and I said, please put the hat on. I told the kids that an elf was visiting. So I kid you not, I laughed for an hour and a half before he showed up. And my wife was like, I said, P.S., we left some food in the kitchen for you. Because he got in relatively late. So in the kitchen, I'd taken one of the kids' stools and I had a little step stool up to the microwave. So that was fun. So this is all premeditated, right? So then I'm still laughing and I'm waiting for him to some type of reaction. So then he goes to bed in the guest bedroom and I had a step stool into the bed. And that's what finally broke him. He's like, are you kidding me? And he said some other choice words. Just so good. But that leaves me open for a lot of pranks in reverse as well. So,
I'm sure.
and I can't wait to send him in this podcast because it just deepens the humor and the longevity. This is no less than 15 years ago, but I still laugh about it.
All right. Second question, maybe a little deeper. What day would you like to relive?
I mean, we go with when I realized that I'd fallen in love with my now wife, or when the kids were born. But those are, I'll go with a less obvious answer. And those are the ones that you want to go back to and revisit. But one of my favorite it was near my 25th birthday. A group of wonderful, amazing friends and I had gone to a B.B. King concert, who's now passed, in Raleigh, North Carolina. It was just the best, most blissful day. And B.B. King started out the concert, and it was his 75th birthday. And he said, before I start, I just want to tell a little bit about my background. And he wove through when he started to learn to play guitar and with whom he partnered and how it wasn't a popular art form. And, there was a lot of discrimination and racism and, a challenge to break into the market in the industry, and to playing with Clapton. And just, he wove this most beautiful 12, 15-minute story. And then he stopped and he said, so it was his 70th birthday. My apologies. He said, so on my 70th birthday, I want to thank you for letting me play my music for you. And he had a 15-minute, standing ovation before he ever played a lick of music. It was just a magical thing to see and experience and be there with friends. And so it was just a really cool thing to have done. And it would be great to relive that.
That's really cool. Thank you for sharing that. We're going to go even deeper here. I feel like that's what we're supposed to do. The third question is about work ethic. Who has influenced your work ethic the most?
So I grew up with my grandparents. So I alluded to having lost my parents when I was younger. And my grandparents were just salt of the earth. If you think about that age demographic, and, so I'm 54 now, turning 55 later in the month. So if you think about that demographic, they lived through the Great Depression. So it was waste not, want not, work hard, play hard, but you work first and play on the back end. And, so my grandparents just really instilled in me honesty, integrity, authenticity, work ethic, so all of those things influenced. And then, I'll segue that into a professor of mine at Michigan State, Don Power, who's passed now, unfortunately was. So I'd gone to Michigan State for grad school, and I didn't know that I was going to love HR. So I'd come out of IO psychology. He was the first class I had. 15 minutes of class, I was like, I could do this for the rest of my life. He made you think. It was strategic HR. I mean, I'm like, wow, this is beautiful. He became a friend and a mentor. But while he was in the professor capacity and starting to mentor, I went to him and I said, I enjoy your class so much, but we're in this class of contemporary labor relations, and we're looking at stuff that's 15, 20 years dated. We're not looking at any of the current content. And he looked at me and said, well, what are you going to do about it? What do you mean? What am I going to do about it? And he said, I find it very interesting on who you feel the consumer is in this equation. I'm paying for my education. I have the right to demand better. So he was right. And he put me on a path of wherever I'm at, I have to be the change. So I went and had a conversation with the professor, and it didn't go very well. But then I set up a forum, and we had a labor and employment attorney. We had a workforce attorney and a labor attorney, and had them battling it out, and had 40 people attend and did something. But it was, who's the consumer, and what's my role in this? And can I be an active and adamant change agent in any capacity, in any role I'm ever in? you don't have to be, have the title manager to be a leader. So I've tried to practice that throughout my life.
Well, that is actually an excellent segue into the second half of this podcast, because we want to talk about the second half of the topic. So the first half was, how do you become a vulnerable leader and how do you inspire people through that vulnerability? And the second half is, how do you actually make change happen because you have been a vulnerable leader? And so in our prep call, you also shared this example that you alluded to just earlier about gender equity and how you basically created systems to solve it. And I'm wondering, maybe to start that story off, what was the stated problem, what you were told you were solving versus the problem that you were actually solving?
So IBM enviably has really aspirational diversity objectives across the globe. I'll quote numbers, they're probably close enough. We were nearly 20% women executives within IBM Japan. And that was less than we were globally. So it was funny because the global team said, you need to do better and be more here. And whereas in Japan, you're running at sub 2%. So I'm 10% of the market, 10% great. I'm 10 times greater than the market. We were admired across Japan for the work we were doing on diversity and, how many women we had in the executive ranks. But what I realized, so I was given an objective of improving that. But what I realized is that we didn't have the pipeline to drive it successfully or viably into the future. I've referenced the process of active listening and roundtables. So I'd done that with some high potential women. And, I'd done some external conferences. I understood the dynamics of the market. I'd done some conversations to plan for those meetings. Some of the problems I knew we needed to improve on the pipeline, et cetera. So, but, I opened up the conversations and I was getting some good input, but it's Japan, right? So it was myself and 14, 15 women. And I started asking questions. I said, so would you take a promotional opportunity if it was offered to you? Now, they were high potential, so I knew that if they hadn't been offered, they would be soon enough. I'd want to know that I could do 100% of the job correctly before I took it. Okay. So now I'm winging this. I don't have the planned questions out, but I said, so what about your male counterparts? And they said, oh, they wouldn't care. They would take it no matter what, right? So they wouldn't know that they needed to do the job correctly, which I thought was really interesting. So there's a risk orientation. Now, and this is in context, Japan and Japanese, but there are some similarities that you could play through and for the rest of this discussion. So I said, okay, that's understanding. Okay, got it. Now, who would be better at performing in the job? And I literally simultaneously had 14 women look, if you know Japan, mumble, look down, and avoid eye contact. So I paused and I let it sit for a little bit. And I said, okay, you know the answer and I know the answer. And my job is to put the best person in the role, not the one most willing to take risk. So what are the things holding you back? And we had a really good discussion. It was wanting to have a safety net or, a support structure in place or, an opportunity to ask for help or to tap out if they felt like they needed to. But I did a lot of listening to what the feedback they gave me through that discussion. So we designed something called the Move Up program. I'm sure they've probably renamed it or made it cleaner, prettier since then. So we listened to everything they said. So we worked with management, identified, the right population. So out of the gate, we did 50 women and we did it during the compensation and promotion cycle. And we said, we want you to be part of this program. We'd like to give you a promotion in band or level. We want to give you a 10% salary increase. And as support structure, we want to give you a quarterly check-in with HR and a mentor with whom you can work. And here's the clincher. If after 6 months you feel like you can't perform successfully in the job, you can let us know and we'll give you your old job back, but you keep the 10% salary increase.
That's a real reversal of risk.
Sure is.
Structural. That's really
maybe
fascinating.
You don't need to go that extreme in some cases. And we were experimenting and playing around. We didn't know what would and wouldn't work. So it was interesting. So we ran that 3 halves in a row. So we did 50 and then 50 at the beginning of month 7 and 50 again at the beginning of month 13. So we promoted 151 women over that 12-month period. And the point of pride, I say that I shouldn't have said that, but how many women do you think went back to their old jobs?
Not a one. Yep. Zero. Not a single one went back, and they were all performing. We checked in on them, right? We checked on their performance, and they were all doing really well. So they were doing well. And during that 12 months, we lost 3 of them left the company. So 3 out of 150 is about a 2% attrition rate, which was a third of that of the rest of the company. So at the time, it was an investment in pipeline building. It was an investment in them. It lowered attrition out of people we thought critical. It did everything right, and it built our pipeline for the future. So I want to go back to that conversation. That moment that you described, it changed the conversation. It changed the energy in the room. It unlocked folks. Had you thought about that? Like, how can I unlock? How can I get them to see the opportunity before you were in the room? Or did that happen spontaneously?
I'd love to say that it was planned. It wasn't. The value of active listening, and if you think about whether it be Adam Grant or whoever the speaker might be, it's yes and, right? So, because it felt right in the moment and led to a different set of questions than what I might have planned. So, and I think we have to all do that. I started when and where I can doing before big. If I'm interviewing somebody, if I'm being interviewed, if I'm having a discussion, I've tried, or it's an important meeting, I've tried to meditate for a couple minutes before to clear my mind, because what I find is that I'm more intuitive and able to link better with the conversation being held in the moment, and hearing things in what they say and how they respond about what their real interest is, so I can go directionally deeper into that regard.
But so that takes an intention. What I'm trying to get at is for folks who are listening, like, what are the repeatable things, right? So it sounds like an intention around kind of mental clarity before going into the conversation, and a real following deeply of what they're hearing and not necessarily following your own agenda.
Yeah, it feels like there's some humility involved. I don't know what this is going to be, but I sort of trust the system of listening and
a willingness to risk and experiment.
Yeah.
One of the things I employ, generally is I don't know that everybody wants to be a leader. And sometimes it's like, who wants to lead in this conversation? You see 10 people step back and the person who forgot to step back, So I try to step in and take it, and I will not have a fully fleshed out idea, but I'll have something grounded in some semblance of fact, intuition, or whatever. I'm not afraid to be the first to throw an idea out, but when I do so, I do no attachment of ego, and I let it get beaten up and battered down, but I listen and I hear what they say, so that when I come forward again, it is an amalgamation of all those ideas, so as to gain value, credibility, receptivity, etc. It's to your point on humility, it's that low ego listening that has allowed me over time to amalgamate the best ideas. If I go back to Japan, I take that situation of move up and I started going external to IBM, and I talked about, here's what we learned, here's what we experimented. Some companies really love the move up idea, but there was a repetition of the challenges in the workforce. And as I shared more vulnerably about what the women or the diverse population at IBM is experiencing, people are like, yeah, that's what we feel. And so then we had a group of people who started to come together to build solutions. So we started deep in the dialogue, and we did that on a quarterly basis. And the first one had 28 meetings, and the fourth one had the first one had 28 companies, and the fourth one had 125 companies. And it was a workshop. It wasn't a presentation. It was, let's come together and brainstorm and share best practices and what's working and what's not working, and led to the development of a playbook that you could use for diversity in Japan. If you were starting from infancy and scratch where you didn't have anything, or you had greater maturity, pick and play where you wanted to engage. That was a far round out, but it was on the point of humility and vulnerability and sharing, and how that has elicited some really provocative outcomes for me throughout time.
There are a couple of things that strike me as you're talking about this. You just said low ego, but I would argue that it's low ego, high confidence, which is a really interesting thing in that you have the confidence to listen, and you have the confidence to know that whatever comes out of your mouth next is going to be okay. I feel like a lot of people don't listen because they have an agenda in their head, or a fear of looking like they don't have something smart to say in response. But you have been able to develop through, I'm sure, an immense amount of practice, kind of a quiet confidence that if I just listen, we'll find the right thing together. The other thing that strikes me related to confidence too is that in all of those situations...
Can you write that down so I can practice it?
In that all of those situations, you had the ability to go do something about it. It wasn't someone in corporate saying, Zane, you have to build this type of program and you need to get these people on board. It was go figure it out and come back with a thing that you think we should experiment with, which is a fundamentally different amount of trust and confidence is coming from the rest of the organization into you as an HR leader.
I have It's funny, in Japan, you take a quarterly stress index, annual. It's been 7 years since I've been in Japan, but you take with regularity a stress index, and I tested low on stress, and I'm like, how is this even remotely possible? Because there was a ton of work going on, just challenge we were handling. But I felt like I had influence over the environment. That was the counterbalance. It could be high stress, but if you had a high influence, but I've always felt like I could influence the game in which I was playing. So at whatever capacity, whether I was an individual contributor and working on a stock option plan in IBM, or working with a nonprofit and trying to help, make an impact there, I've always felt like I had an ability to influence a more favorable outcome. And I think so you reference high confidence. I guess, I don't know. I would say I don't know, high confidence. I am deeply passionate about moving something forward and making it better. I want to be a conduit from A to a better B. There are my hands. So that is what I'm all about. So,
and to be clear, I think I'm not in any way saying negative, but we talk a lot about how in some situations, HR feels like it needs to be empowered, but that there is instead a need to do what you just said, which is just believe that you can do it, that you need to be the change to step up, as opposed to being told to be the change or being told what the change needs to be. And I think that's it's an incredible example of that shifted mindset, which I think is so powerful. And we see in the best HR leaders that we talk to.
Yeah. Believe, add value, have an impact. All of it. Yeah.
Yeah. We are unfortunately at time and need to wrap up. You passed, Zane. You're good. We usually wrap up by asking one question. We call it our purpose question. And that question is, why do you do the work that you do?
Did I not just answer that? So I want to have an impact in anything and everything I do and make it better. And, whether that be helping the neighbor move a tree off their yard, or trying to add some depth in a nonprofit, or make an impact in the company. You talked about brand earlier in a negative way, but mine, that I've got on LinkedIn is to be an aspiring artist in human potential. So my journey right now is vulnerability, and I'm playing around with that and how it helps make the workforce better. So I think all of that comes together in how can we play our biggest game and add the most value and bring others along for the ride and or help them succeed.
Good answer. Thanks, Zane.
Thank you.
Okay, that's a wrap for this episode of Workplace Stories. If you like what you heard, please subscribe to our podcast so that you can be the first to know about future episodes. For exclusive access to our research, insights, and a vibrant network of human capital leaders, consider joining the Red Thread Research community. Visit redthreadresearch.com to learn more and to take your workplace to the next level.